On first down, they hand off to Marlon Mack. Huge hole, 50-yard line. He's at the 40, still going near sideline. He's at the 10. He's at the 5, and he will score. Touchdown, Marlon Mack. Touchdown, I-N-D-Y. And again, it's picked off. It's Darius Leonard. Leonard with a second INT, and he's streaking down the near sideline. He's at the 40. He's at the 30. He's at the 20. He's going to go. A pick six for the Maniac. Kenny Moore gets to Deshaun Watson. That's a sack for Kenny Moore. Kenny has a pick and now a sack in the game.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
Hello, Colts fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Bring the Juice podcast. I am your host, Cody Felger. Alongside me, Derek Larger. Derek, the Colts just released, we're recording this on Thursday, May 7th. The Colts just released a few hours ago their 2020 NFL schedule. We're going to go through, in this podcast, going to go through each and every one of the games that the Colts are going to play, give our thoughts on kind of what we think may happen in the schedule and kind of give our reaction to each game. The Colts only got one primetime game. It's an away game against the Tennessee Titans.
Bull crap.
Week 10, November 12th. That's the only primetime game the Colts get.
Yeah, I was saying that's bull crap. I'm gonna say that here later on, believe me. But yeah, that's nonsense.
Yeah, we'll get into that. But we can start here with week one. The Colts start out on the road against the Jacksonville Jaguars, division rivals, September 13th. And Derek, this is a place where the Colts notoriously in the last few years have struggled to come out victorious. The Colts have struggled a lot in this game, but I tweeted it out a little bit earlier. How great would it be if the Colts got off to a great start, kind of getting over a hump, if you will, beating their division rival? I know Jacksonville is not even close to the team they were even last year and the year before, but, a place that you've notoriously struggled at. It would be, I think it would be a tough battle. It always is down there in Jacksonville, but I think it would be a good way to know, hey, this is kind of something that we've struggled with. We're able to get over the hump now and kind of set you up early for success here. What are your thoughts here on the first game here in Jacksonville?
Yeah, like you said, it's first game of the season. It's going to be a hot, probably humid one in Jacksonville. So it always is there in September. These summers kind of extend down there in Florida. Yeah, like you said, this is a place that the Colts have notoriously struggled over the last several years. And it's probably no different this season. I mean, it's going to be the first game with all these new bodies that the Colts have acquired and the new faces that are going to be on this team. It would not surprise me in the slightest to see us struggle because, you're going into a hostile environment on a hot day. You got a whole bunch of new faces that are not used to playing with each other. And especially with quarantine, it makes it a little bit more difficult to get things started. And, being on the road, it certainly doesn't help. And it would not surprise me if we did struggle in this game. But, again, it's like you mentioned also, it's an AFC divisional rival here. We need to win this game because it sets the precedent. If you lose this one, we're already maybe in last place in the division, all ready to start out. Of course, it's not the end of the world, but it definitely does hurt going down the line. So it's a very, very, very pivotal point for the Colts to start off the season strong at Jacksonville. I know, like you said, Gardner Minshew is going to probably be the starting quarterback. They don't really have a whole lot going for them in regards to everything. They got a lot of new bodies, especially on defense, but they're going to be young. They're going to be hungry for a win just as much as we are. So we got to be careful because if you don't lose that game, then we go into our next game here, which is back at home. And if we don't win against Jacksonville, it's going to make it even more difficult to win the next week on September 20th when we return home to Lucas Oil to face the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings who, again, made it to the playoffs last year and, fought hard and just ultimately lost to San Francisco, who went on to go to the Super Bowl. Minnesota, who's got a ground and pound run game just like we do with Dalvin Cook. Kirk Cousins, that definitely is a good quarterback. Even though they lost Stephon Diggs, they'll still have Adam Thielen, Kyle Rudolph, and some other pieces there as well. And that defense is no joke. That defense is definitely a solid defense. Wouldn't say it's great defense, but it's certainly far from a bad defense or a solid defense. So this is a solid all-around Minnesota team that's going to come into our building and is a little bit more unified at the beginning of the season than us because they played a lot more together with the majority of that roster. So, Cody, what are you thinking here when it comes to Minnesota? Can the Colts pull the win out on this one?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a tough fought game because you mentioned Minnesota is a very good overall team. I know the loss of Stephon Diggs certainly hurts. Everson Griffin, also a free agent. He's not coming back. But I think the thing that will be interesting to me is this is Xavier Rhodes' first game against his former team. So it'll be interesting to see, does he, we kind of seen with players on the Colts who face other teams. It seems like sometimes there's a little bit more of a chip on their shoulder, right? Like they want to prove something, like you made a mistake when you released me. And I think this will be interesting to see, does Xavier Rhodes have a monster game in this game? Returning and telling the Vikings, hey, you guys released me too early. I'm coming out here and balling. So it's certainly going to be an interesting game for sure. But I think it definitely, the Vikings are one of the best teams in the NFL. We like to think on paper the Colts have one of the better rosters in the NFL. So I certainly think it'll be a good test. Fortunately for the Colts, it's their first home game. So the crowd will be electric. The crowd will be behind them. I certainly think this is a game that's winnable. I do. And I think it's going to be a good test and a good measuring stick, with some of the NFC elites and some of the best teams in the NFL with the Minnesota Vikings up there in that ranking. It'll be certainly a good test and kind of seeing, how good can this Colts team be here in 2020, right? Can they compete? Can they beat even some of the best teams in the NFC? So it certainly will be a game that I'm really interested to see, especially with the Xavier Rhodes connection, and also just a measuring stick for the Colts here, seeing kind of early on, hey, where do we line up against some of those teams like I mentioned? And then week 3, the Colts play against the New York Jets at home again, September 22nd. This is actually not a 1 o'clock game. It's a 4 o'clock game. 4:05 p.m. is the kickoff. And the Jets, one of our social media guy put out a post the other day that I thought was really interesting. I think it's now 11 players with the signing of Frank Gore, 11 guys who formerly were on the Colts.
Actually, I think it's 12.
Is it 12 now?
I think it's 12 now.
11 or 12. But there's a lot, needless to say, there's a lot of former Colts on the Jets. And that can obviously be, attributed to the Rex Hogan, who used to be with the Colts and is now with the Jets. That connection is certainly something. The Jets added Quincy Wilson. They traded for Quincy Wilson, gave a 6th-round pick. So there's going to be a lot of interesting stories and a lot of interesting ties between these two teams here. The Jets have not been particularly good these last few years. And we also know, that connection years ago with the Colts and the Jets when the Jets traded up to get Sam Darnold 3 overall, and they gave the Colts a bunch of 2nd-round picks. So there's a lot of history between these two teams in recent years. I certainly think this, out of these first 3 games, I think this game is the most winnable. I don't think the Jets are a particularly great team. It'll be interesting to see, can you slow down Sam Darnold? Can you slow down this offense? Overall, though, I think this is a game that's very, very winnable for the Colts here, especially at home. What are your thoughts here, Derek, on the Jets game?
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting matchup because New York Jets have faced the Colts a few times over the last couple years, and the Jets have always made a pretty decent game when it comes to the Colts' sake. Obviously, in 2018, they got the better of us as well on that slow start. Expect to see something again like that because the New York Jets, they're just a scrappy team that just somehow keeps themselves in games because, Sam Darnold's going to be a year older. They added some pieces to that wide receiver corps. Obviously, you still got Le'Veon Bell there. That offensive line, with the addition of a Mekhi Becton, that's going to help them for sure. They still have some work to do up front on that offensive line, but they definitely got a little better. And I think they've lost a few pieces on defense, but that's still a decent defense. I mean, this is not a team that, you can just throw away by any stretch of the imagination. This team is still a decent team on paper. Would not surprise me to see another close game here, but yeah, like you said, of the 3 games so far, this one does seem the most winnable because it's the second game of a back-to-back home stretch here. And, 3 weeks into the season is much better than week 1 and week 2 going into the season. And then we go to the 4th game of the season. That is the at Chicago, where we face the Bears on October 4th at 1 p.m. on Sunday. So obviously you see a massive QB controversy there in Chicago. Do they go with Mitch Trubisky or do they go with Nick Foles? Because obviously they picked up Nick Foles from Jacksonville this offseason. Again, still not a lot of like great offensive weapons for Chicago, not necessarily, but that defense, again, like even with losing a player or two, still have a really good defensive roster. You got Khalil Mack that you're obviously going to have to account for, and other guys that are really good at pressuring the quarterback. They're really going to have to devise that scheme better. And Matt Nagy certainly has a good set of schemes on both sides of the ball that he can really exploit against teams. So I think this one's another one that's perfectly capable of being a win. We're a much better team overall on both ends of the ball. But again, it's on the road in Chicago. You never know how the weather's going to be there at this time of the year. And obviously, another road game in a tough environment with a physical team. That will certainly be a fun one again. What are you thinking here, Cody?
Yeah. And Soldier Field is just such a hard place to play for any opponent. But yeah, you mentioned the 2 quarterbacks, Trubisky and Nick Foles. Neither of those quarterbacks scare me. I mean, last year the Colts shut down Nick Foles. He did absolutely nothing against them. And we know Mitch Trubisky, we saw last year how much he struggled. So that doesn't really worry me. It's just this Bears defense you mentioned. They're one of the best in the league. And I think this is going to be more of a low-scoring game, kind of a slugger-type game. But it'd be interesting. Can the Colts make a few more plays than the Bears offense? And I think that'll ultimately be the difference in this game. If it was at home, it would probably be a little bit of a different story, just because I mentioned you had the crowd behind you. It's just a different environment. But playing in a hostile environment like Soldier Field, I think it'll make it tough on any offense. So, yeah, for me, I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. But ultimately, I do think this is a game the Colts can pull out. The Bears particularly great last year. I mean, their defense was pretty good, but their offense was just atrocious. And so I definitely think DeForest Buckner and company will have a very, very good day against this very below-average Bears offense. But no, overall, I think this is a game that the Colts can win. I think just because it's away, I think it's going to be maybe a little bit tougher to win than the Jets game. And I think home field advantage is obviously a big deal. And then we can move now to week 5. The Colts travel to Cleveland October 11th, play at 4:25. And this is a game that was interesting, especially because of last year within training camp. The Colts and the Browns, they were in training camp together. There was some – it was an interesting time, to say the least. There was a lot of going back and forth. And ultimately – neither team really did what they thought was going to happen, right? We thought the Colts were a team that was going to take the division after that 2018 season. And then for obvious reasons, Andrew Luck retiring, the Colts go sub 500. And the Browns, a lot of people were saying the Browns are a Super Bowl team, and they were far from it in 2019. So it was kind of interesting because both of these teams were very hyped up in the offseason last year, and both teams very underperformed for different reasons. But, the dog pound. The dog pound's a tough place to play, too. The Colts go to 2 straight weeks of very hostile environments playing in. I think the Browns overall, they're very talented. But how disciplined are they going to be? I kind of look at the Browns a little bit like the Jacksonville Jaguars a few years ago, right? Obviously, I think Baker Mayfield's a lot better quarterback than I think. What was his name? The quarterback for the Jaguar, Blake Bortles. I don't know why I forgot
Blake
that.
Bortles.
Blake Bortles. He helped.
That's
the Colts
how
on more than
easy it
one
is to
occasion.
forget his name because he was that terrible.
Yeah, he came and was gone in like a season. So there's so many Jacksonville quarterbacks. It's hard to keep up with them now. But anyway, lots of talent. But the question is, can they channel that talent and then can they work as a team? And I think that's going to be the most important thing. Obviously, that defense has Myles Garrett, who is just a game wrecker. If he doesn't swing his helmet and try to hit another Colt, it seems like Jack Doyle is always the guy that's getting attacked for no reason at all. But no, certainly it's going to be an interesting game to see. The Browns obviously disappointed last year. Is this a year where they kind of put it together now? Both these teams are very talented. I don't think they lived up to their talent last year. Derek, what are you thinking here in the game here against Cleveland?
Yeah, this is going to be a very tough one for the Colts. Again, I know everyone wants to say, oh, it's Cleveland. They disappoint just like they always do. Well, look, they've fixed their offensive line quite a bit this offseason. They obviously acquired Jack Conklin from Tennessee, took that out of the division, and obviously acquired Jedrick Wills and a few other offensive linemen. So they did bolster up their offensive line this offseason, added another weapon in Austin Hooper. So they have a very, very vast amount of weapons that they can destroy you with. And not one of them is better than the other. There's just, you could throw it to either one of them and they will, and run it with either one of them, and they just will kill you at any moment if they so choose to. And obviously that defense, very undisciplined, but it's very talented. Who knows how they're going to be this next season? Maybe they start to become a little bit more disciplined, because obviously that was what kept them out of a lot of games last year, was they led the league in penalties per game. So they need to fix that, obviously. But yeah, 425 game, middle of October. It's at the Dog Pound. It's going to be very, very difficult for them. Who knows how that's going to go for them? And then we go back home for one last game before our bye week, week 6 against the Cincinnati Bengals at home. It's going to be a 1:00 game. They'll face the Cincinnati Bengals going against Joe Burrow in his first season. Still a young, inexperienced Bengals team that still has a lot of holes to fill. I think a lot of people would probably say this might be the easiest game on the schedule for us at this moment in time, is the Cincinnati Bengals. But even then, again, over the last few years, just somehow, some way, it just seems that the Colts just seem to struggle against the Bengals somehow, some way. But I think that the Colts will pull this one out. What are we thinking here, Cody, when we're talking about the Bengals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned, how the Colts have struggled recently. For whatever reason, I go back to that game last year, the game that we were in. We met each other at the Miami game, and I mean, you talk about a crap show. That was the worst game I've ever seen, and I think you can probably attest to that too. But it just goes to show, the Colts earlier in that season, they beat the Super Bowl champion, the eventual Super Bowl champions, and then they go and lose to one of the worst teams in the league. And so I think you can just, with the NFL, every game you can't look past a team. And I think that's what the Colts did last year, unfortunately, especially with Miami. So, yeah, for me, I just think that this is something where it could potentially be a trap game for the Colts. Obviously Cincinnati was not good last year. They had number 1 overall pick, selected Joe Burrow. They added T. Higgins, also a big body receiver with A.J. Green and with Tyler Boyd. So they have a pretty good receiving core. Joe Mixon's obviously a really good running back as well. So I think this is a game that, you mentioned they have holes. Like, there's a reason why they were picking number 1 overall last year. But I think this is a game that if the Colts aren't completely disciplined and focused on the Bengals, this is a game that could potentially get away from them. And I don't want to see that happen, obviously. But I think this is so important. This is why a big reason why I think the Colts had such a terrible backslide last year. They started 5-2, 5-3, and then what happened? They finished 7-9. They just, the back half of the season was completely awful. And I think this is the easiest game for them that they should win. But going into your bye week, you want to take care of business, right? I think this is always kind of something that I always was like, man, people are saying, when Andrew Luck was there, obviously Andrew Luck's a fantastic quarterback, but sometimes the Colts struggled to put away bad teams. They eventually beat them, but it was something where it was like, shouldn't you be like destroying this team? Why are you struggling against this team? And I think the Colts cannot afford to do that. I think they need to play up to their talent, and they need to bury the Bengals. I mean, this game should not be close. And I think that will ultimately be a big factor in determining okay, are the Colts a playoff division winning team, or are the Colts an 8-8, 7-9 team? I think ultimately that's what it comes down to. It'll certainly be good to go into the bye, get some guys, because inevitably there will be injuries, get some guys healed up for the next game, and where you're traveling to Detroit, to Ford Field here and playing the Lions on November 1st. This is a game that, also depending on the health of Matthew Stafford, I think that's a big, big thing here. The Lions were not very good last year, but we know Matthew Stafford's a pretty good quarterback when healthy. Yeah, this could certainly be another trap game, too, if the Colts aren't careful. Derek, what are you thinking here for the Detroit game?
Well, again, we always revisit the narrative of Matt Stafford doesn't perform well at all against teams that are 500 or better. So if the Colts have a 3-3 or better record going into this game, I'm calling Colts win, and I'm not even going to be scared about it. Look, Matt Patricia's kind of lost the locker room a little bit when you look at the Darius Slay incident that happened this last offseason. And beforehand, Matt Stafford again, has he's just going to go into the season again unknown. We just don't know a lot about what the Lions are going to be able to do. Obviously, they acquired Jeff Okudah with the third pick. Obviously, got a shutdown corner. That'll be really funny to see Jeff Okudah and Paris Campbell playing against each other this time instead of with each other like they did at Ohio State. But yeah, again, it's an interesting matchup for sure. Being at Ford Field, it won't even probably feel that weird because, Ford Field just feels a lot like Lucas Oil in a lot of ways. I've been at both stadiums. They're both really nice and, just kind of have a lot of similarities in a way. But I think the Colts should handle business on this one. So I do predict a win here. And now the game that this is going to be the toughest game on the schedule for us. And I am absolutely ashamed that this was not a primetime game. And it's going to be the November 8th game where we're back at home against the Baltimore Ravens. Again, don't know why this isn't a primetime game, but whatever. We're going to go into this. So obviously, you got Lamar Jackson, the reigning MVP, and his unique ability to play. Adding J.K. Dobbins to that backfield as well. They got some more wide receivers / tight ends to help him out and added a lot more defensive help as well. So Baltimore Ravens don't appear to be losing much of a step, at least not as of this moment. And even if it's at home here, I got to be honest here, Cody. I mean, this is a very tough Baltimore Ravens team, and I don't know how the Colts are going to be able to slow Lamar Jackson down. I obviously know that other teams have done it, but we might have to go into a shootout to actually be able to do it. And I don't know if the Colts will be able to shoot out the Ravens because of that defense. I'm not so sure on this one.
Yeah. Yeah, the Ravens are certainly the most talented and the best team that the Colts are going to face this year. But yeah, you mentioned it. Lamar Jackson is just on another planet. Like, this guy is just insane. It'll be interesting to see, can the Colts contain him? I know, with Deshaun Watson, a lot of times the Colts put Darius Leonard as a spy on him. I'll be interested to see, do they do something similar when they face Lamar Jackson? Or, how do they account for both his arm and also his legs? I think that's just such a tricky thing because he can beat you with both. And you mentioned Baltimore has a pretty good defense too. So I think this will definitely be the toughest test for the Colts by far this year. And similar to that Minnesota game, this is definitely going to be a measuring stick, especially in the AFC. Even if the Colts don't win this game, I want them to at least compete in this game. And I think that'll do a lot for your confidence. Even if you don't pull out a victory here, I think if you can say we can compete with the best of the best, I think that'll certainly go a long way for your confidence down the road because you're going to play some other teams. You're in the back half of this schedule, a lot of division games. And, really, besides the Week 11 game against Green Bay, all the other teams are in the AFC. And so it'll be interesting then to see, if you come off and you play really well and you head into Tennessee in Week 10, you have a lot of confidence. Hey, we just went toe-to-toe with one of the best teams in the AFC. let's go. We can beat the Titans, no problem. So yeah, I guess that leads me into the next one at Tennessee, Week 10, the only primetime game that the Colts are playing, and it's an away game. I don't know, Derek, the last time I've seen the Colts have a home primetime game. It's been a long time.
Yeah, I think Andrew said it was a back in 2013, I think he said was the last time we had a home primetime game, I believe.
Was it that Philadelphia game? I think I was at that game.
I don't remember if it was Philadelphia or if it was Denver. I don't know. I'm not quite sure. I think it might have been Denver. I think it was because I think we were.
Yeah.
Wasn't that the year? Wasn't that the game that Peyton Manning came back? I think that was the year that Peyton Manning came back to Lucas Oil for the first time. I think. Yeah. I think that was the last time the Colts had a primetime game like that at home.
That's nuts. No, a little bit of a tangent here. I was able to get to that game with my dad, and it was just incredible. Yeah. Because I watched Peyton Manning for a couple of years. I started becoming a Colts fan. I think the AFC Championship game was the first game I actually watched, and then I just kind of progressively started watching the Colts after that. That game was incredible. I mean, I had Peyton Manning on my fantasy team that year, which was one of the best choices I've ever made in my life in terms of fantasy football. And, I was kind of like, okay, obviously I want the Colts to win, but I want Peyton Manning to do pretty good too. And so it was like Peyton Manning threw 3 touchdowns, but the Colts won. Robert Mathis stripped Peyton Manning in the end zone. Just an incredible game overall. Very, very excited for that. That's crazy that's the last primetime game the Colts have had, even with having Andrew Luck for the next few years. Yeah, that's nuts to me. And it's not even a home game, which is just ridiculous.
Yep. And the sad part is with this Tennessee Titans away game, it's a Thursday night football game. So that makes it even worse. I predict the loss here. I'm just going to come out and say it right now, folks. When you have two teams that are both decent and one is coming off, both of these teams obviously are coming off short weeks, but the issue you have is most of the time the home team wins on a short week most of the time because they're not the ones that are traveling and things of that nature. So I want to say we win this, but I can't, at least not as of right now. Unless I start seeing something later in the season that tells me that the Colts are not going to beat them or can beat them, I'm going to keep saying Tennessee, at least for this one. And then we go into 2 home games here. First one being the Green Bay Packers. And this is easily the second most difficult one on our schedule here. Obviously, you have Aaron Rodgers, if he actually is the quarterback there at that time. Who knows? Matt LaFleur could be really weird about it for that weird reason. But obviously, you got offense with Aaron Jones, new offensive line, a revamped running game, and you obviously have whatever quarterback they're going to use. Most likely it's Aaron Rodgers. And even though they lost some pieces in that defense, they still have a pretty decent defense for sure. That's going to be a tough one for sure, but thank God we're getting to play them at home. So it does give us a decent chance, I'm sure. So I like to think I have good chances for the Colts. It just depends on their health, but at least they're going to have, 9 days in between to get some rest from that. So they'll probably be in good shape by then.
Yeah. Yeah. And we saw that. I wanted to make kind of the parallel back in 2018 when the Colts started off 1-5, right? And after that infamous Houston game, went to overtime. What was it? Double overtime? It was crazy, whatever it was. And the Colts lost. It was a long, long game. And then they come back a few days later. They travel to New England. And, half their roster was injured. It was insane. And it kind of gives you those similar vibes to maybe that might happen. You're playing one of the best teams in the league in the Ravens, and then you come back a few days later and you play your division rival, not even at home. It kind of gives me those similar vibes. I don't really like that at all, but maybe if the Colts are able to win one of those 2 games somehow and they're able to heal up a little bit. You mentioned they're going to have more than a week to get back and get healthy, and they can start on a win streak potentially. And that's kind of what they did there in 2018 after that New England game. They started winning a bunch of games, and then they finished 10-6, and they won a wild card game. So I think if they can get through that stretch and they can weather the storm, that'll be huge for this team. And if they can stay relatively healthy, that'll also be a big key as well. But as far as Green Bay is concerned, this is the team. Yeah, they're very talented. Obviously, their defense was really good last year with some of their free agent additions. I believe it was Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith. I believe those are the two Smiths that they brought in. They were really effective, and they just had a really good defense last year. And, obviously we know how great of a quarterback Aaron Rodgers is, but, they just decided to kind of do something a little bit crazy and draft a quarterback there, Jordan Love, in the first round. So who knows what could happen? There could be a lot of drama that unfolds between then and now. Obviously, we think it's going to be Aaron Rodgers, and it most likely will be. But no, overall, I think this will be a tough game, but I think this is a game that's very winnable as well, especially since you have more days to prepare for the Packers, and you also will hopefully be a lot more healthy than the last two games there. And then we can move on here to Week 12, another home game against the Tennessee Titans again. This is the game that I think now the Colts are going to be healthy again. I think this is going to be a very key game in kind of determining how the AFC South plays out, because obviously you think Tennessee is going to be up there, Houston might be up there, and Indy might be up there. And so it'll be interesting. I think this will be a very key game to whether or not the Colts are even in play to potentially, challenge for the division title.
Yeah, this obviously is another big one because, like I said, if I said we were going to lose the first one, we have to obviously win the second one. And being on back-to-back home weeks, again, certainly is nice. This is just a really tough stretch of games. When you look at the Ravens, and then you have to go face a good Tennessee Titans team on a Thursday night football game. And then you're facing Green Bay next week. And then you're going to have to face Tennessee again. Definitely is a very difficult task, but again, it's at home. I think the Colts will be in gear at that time. I think we've beaten the Tennessee Titans fairly well at home most seasons, so it doesn't scare me as much now, but obviously facing on the road is a little bit different. If we had Andrew Luck, then I wouldn't be scared, but of course that's not happening. So, and then obviously next week, our first game in December, and it's the first time we see the Texans, and we will see them for a 1 p.m. game at Houston. Obviously, Deshaun Watson and that new wide receiver core that they have with no DeAndre Hopkins this time, and a few less pieces on defense that we're familiar with. So it does seem to me, like a fairly winnable game. Obviously T.Y. Hilton, if he's still available, he's going to be coming back home for a game there. So, because, T.Y. Hilton owns that place. We Colts fans know this. So what are you thinking here, Cody? Is this a winnable one for you?
It certainly is. And you mentioned T.Y. Hilton, NRG Stadium, just might as well rename it T.Y. Hilton Stadium at this point. I mean, that guy's put up insane numbers there in Houston. But yeah, you mentioned it. Houston has become worse this offseason, undoubtedly. They lost a lot of talent. Obviously, some on the defense. DeAndre Hopkins, the most notable one there. But Deshaun Watson is going to be the key. If you can slow down Deshaun Watson, which the Colts have done before, I think you have a pretty good shot. And the good thing about Matt Eberflus is he knows what the Texans run. The Texans aren't really going to be changing anything. I mean, the Colts have seen the Texans now for a few years. Matt Eberflus has seen them for a few years. I think he kind of knows, basically how the Texans work. And so I certainly think this is a game that the Colts can certainly win. If they can slow down Deshaun Watson, they can come out with a victory here. I have no doubt the Colts will probably win that game. And then the next week, they also are traveling to the Raiders there in Las Vegas on December 13th. It's a 4:00 game. Last year, the Colts hosted the Raiders. That was a very ugly game for the Colts. The Raiders just shredded the Colts, and that was a really, really rough game on all levels for the Colts. Special teams, defense, offense. It was just not a good game. And I think the Raiders, Derek, are a team that a lot of people aren't talking about, but they're more talented than meets the eye. When you think of the Raiders, you think, oh, they're probably not going to be very good. I mean, they didn't make the playoffs last year, but there's some talent there that John Gruden and company have assembled with all those first-round draft picks they've had in the last few years. What are your thoughts here on the Raiders?
Yeah, I mean, in this offseason, in this draft, they have filled their team with great depth at every position they needed, got some great talent in the draft. So, yeah, I mean, we can't say that they're not worthy of at least keeping in perspective of what they are, because Colts fans just have to remember this team beat us last year, and it wasn't close either. So, I mean, we have to take this team seriously. And I think I'm actually going to be in Germany during this game too. So I'm going to have to be sure to stream that when I'm there. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see them in Vegas. Probably be a cool sight, but again, being in a new place like Vegas and playing in a stadium like that, obviously, emotions are going to be high for the Raiders. Just have to hope that the Colts stay focused and work hard on that one, because who knows how that's going to go. And then we return home again to face the Texans again. We'll face them 2 times in a matter of 3 weeks. So Colts are going to get very familiar with the Texans very early. That mental memory is going to be there for both teams. Still to be arranged on what time that's going to actually play. So they're probably going to just assume that you just never know when it comes to how this is going to look for both teams record-wise. They're probably waiting to see what time they want to make it because of the records and stuff. But I do find it interesting that, the Colts just kind of look back at the beginning of the schedule. Weeks 2 and 3, they are at home. And then you have week 6 and then week 8. And then you have 10 and 11, and then you have 14. And now that's pretty much 16, the last game of the season. They go 1 week, it's 2 straight games at home. And then they just go a home game 1 week, and then 2 weeks later go back home. It's very interesting how they have that schedule set up. But I don't know, Cody, what do you think here? Is this going to be a split series with the Texans, or the Colts winning this one here too?
I think the Colts are going to win this one, honestly. I mean, last year the Colts beat the Texans with Jacoby Brissett, and the Texans were pretty much at full strength as well. So, yeah, I think this is a game that's certainly winnable. So I think with home field advantage, with playoffs on the line, the Colts will be ready. They'll be focused, and I think they'll take care of business, especially if there are AFC playoff implications, whether it's for the division title or more maybe for a wild card spot, whatever it is. I think the Colts are certainly going to be locked in and certainly ready to take it to the Texans, and I think they will. I think the Colts overall are a more talented team than the Texans. Obviously the Texans had last year, I felt like more high-end talent than the Colts, but the Colts added some talent this year. So I think the Colts certainly have a chance to win here. I'm going to say the Colts are going to sweep the Texans this year. Maybe a little bit of a hot take, but just with the losses the Texans have had and with the additions the Colts have had, I think it's going to happen this year. That's my hot take, if you will, here on the Colts. And I think, they're going to win this game against the Texans here in December. And then we traveled to Pittsburgh. The Colts traveled to Pittsburgh. They traveled to Pittsburgh last year. That was the game when Jacoby Brissett got injured. Brian Hoyer came in and threw a pick six, and it was just it was a competitive game, but that was kind of the start of the slide for the Colts last year. And then Brian Hoyer comes back the next week. Miami game we already talked about, which is terrible, and the Colts could never really recover after that. So certainly it will be an interesting game. Pittsburgh has a pretty good defense. With Ben Roethlisberger returning will certainly be interesting. James Conner. They have a lot of different they have some weapons. They really do. Juju Smith-Schuster, another one. So this could be a game that could be pretty competitive as well. They're two good teams that had very similar records last year, and it was a very competitive game like I mentioned. I think the Colts lost off of a Adam Vinatieri walk-off missed field goal. So I think it's going to be another close, tight game, especially in Heinz Field. And Pittsburgh is a hard place to win as well.
Yep.
Overall, I think it's going to be a tightly contested game. Derek, what are you thinking here against Pittsburgh?
Yeah, Pittsburgh, who last season had the second best defense in the NFL, especially when it came to takeaways. They were just phenomenal at all parts of last season, and they had to be because that offense was not very good for Pittsburgh last season. I mean, even when Pittsburgh played Indianapolis, they did not do insanely amazing offensively when it came to overall production. I mean, obviously their running back had like 15 catches for like 90 yards. I mean, yeah, they did that all game long. They just kept going down the field because of that. It's just going to depend on, who's their quarterback, how healthy are they offensively, because that defense is legit. And hopefully Phillip Rivers, they can show him game film from last year so he doesn't end up throwing a pick six to Minkah Fitzpatrick like they did last year. It's like you said, it's going to be a difficult game. It's always a difficult atmosphere in Pittsburgh, and we never really have great success at Heinz Field. So that will definitely be a difficult one. And the Colts will end the season the way they started it, only this time they're going to be at home against Jacksonville, a 1:00 start on January 3rd, my mom's birthday, which is really cool. Definitely have to be there for that one. But yep, our final home game, our last game of the season against Jacksonville. I do predict a win here because the Colts just find a way to win at home against the Jacksonville Jaguars a lot of the time. Cody, what are you thinking here when we're looking at our final home game against the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Yeah, I think this one's going to be a pretty easy win, honestly. The Jaguars don't scare me in any capacity. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that, but I just think Jacksonville is not a very good team. They're probably going to be a bottom feeder team again. Seems like they're kind of rebuilding a little bit. So, maybe some guys will be fighting for their jobs and it'll be a little bit more of a tight game. But no, overall, I don't think that Jacksonville. But going back to that primetime game, I just discovered the last primetime game the Colts played. It was actually, unfortunately, I don't know why I'm always at the games that are just like weird, but like I was at it was the New England game a few years ago. Yeah, I think you remember the worst play ever. And Pat McAfee has very much explained it. Really, it's hilarious. You should check that out. That was the last game the Colts have played on primetime. So they're due for one. At least that's the last home game, I should say, in primetime. So they're kind of due for one, hopefully soon. But that was just an awful game. I don't even want to talk. Don't even want to think about that game. That was just rough. But that'll do it for this podcast, guys. For Derek and myself, thank you so much for all your support. And it'll be interesting to see now as the offseason's kind of in lull, unless something crazy happens. We'll continue to crank out the content for you guys. We appreciate you so much. Just thank you so much from the bottom of our heart. And for Derek and myself, thank you guys. And as always, go Colts.